All right, folks, Mr. Vanderpool here. Now we're going to go ahead and continue taking a look at multiple deposit expansion. We're going to take a look at the three types of questions you'll see on my tests, as well as the AP test. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is that as we solve these problems, you're going to be looking at the outcome and not the process of multiple deposit expansion. We're going to be talking in class. We're going to be doing an activity in which I'm going to be showing you the process in which multiple deposit expansion happens. But for right now, just go ahead and trust me. And we'll go ahead and be able to do and calculate these scenarios. So type 1 is we're going to calculate the initial change in excess reserves. So excess reserves is equal to total reserves minus required reserves, or total reserves is equal to excess reserves plus required reserves. So this is basically the amount a single bank can loan from an initial deposit. Type 2, we're going to calculate the max change in loans or money supply. It's important to note that it is by banks making loans that the money supply increases. So there's a few assumptions built in there, but basically the change in loans is going to be similar to the change in money supply in the banking system. We'll talk about some of those assumptions in the activity that I previously mentioned. Type 3, we're going to calculate the max change in demand deposit creation. So example 1, we're given a required reserve ratio of 20%. We're going to assume an individual makes a $100,000 demand deposit in Bowser Bank. Bowser wants to get Mario. If I learned anything from the Mario movie, that's what I learned. But either way, that's somewhat beyond the point. All right. Let's see. So we're going to determine the amount of new loans that Bowser Bank can lend from this deposit. So for this, basically you're calculating excess reserves. So the amount of new demand deposits minus required reserves is going to be equal to the initial change in excess reserves, which is the same as the new amount of loans that Bowser Bank can lend from the deposit. So basically all you're going to do is you're going to take the amount of the demand deposit, which was $100,000, minus the amount that the bank has to hold, which is 20% of $100,000. And that will give you your max change in new loans that Bowser Bank can lend, which is, like I said before, the same thing as excess reserves. So we're going to take $100,000 minus $20,000, because 20% of 100,000 is 20,000, and you're going to get $80,000 worth of excess reserves. So from that $100,000 demand deposit, how much can this bank now, the single bank now lend? They can lend $80,000 because that is their excess reserves. Now, example 2. Given a required reserve ratio of 20%, assume an individual makes a $100,000 demand deposit in Bowser Bank. That was similar to the scenario from example 1. This next part is different. We're going to calculate the maximum change over time in new loans or money supply in the banking system from this deposit. So for that, you're going to do the initial change in excess reserves, which we got from example 1, times the money multiplier. So basically that amounts to excess reserves times 1 over the reserve requirement ratio. That's what RRR stands for, reserve requirement ratio. That's going to be equal to the max change in loans or max change in money supply. So from example 1, we got $80,000. That was our excess reserves, times 1 over 20%, which would be the same thing as 1 over 0.2. Which if you plug that into a calculator, you're going to get 5, 80,000 times 5, we have $400,000 max in new loans. So basically from this demand deposit of $100,000, due to the money multiplier, you have $400,000 worth of new loans in the banking system. All right, so let's go to example 3 here. So given a required reserve ratio of 20%, we're going to assume an individual makes a $100,000 demand deposit in Bowser Bank. We're going to calculate the maximum change over time in demand deposits in the banking system from this deposit. So now we're taking a look at max change in demand deposits. So this is basically going to be the max change in loans plus the deposit money. From example 2, we saw the max change in loans was $400,000, plus we now have to add the initial demand deposit of $100,000, and you're going to get $500,000 max change in demand deposits. Another way you can do this is you can take total reserves times 1 over reserve requirement ratio. So the total amount put in, which is 100,000, times the money multiplier, which we calculated from example 2, is 5, you get $500,000. Probably a little easier to do the first way, but the second way works as well. All right, so a quick review. Required reserves is equal to the amount of the deposit times the required reserve ratio. Excess reserves is total reserves minus required reserves. Maximum amount a single bank can loan is equal to change in excess reserves caused by a deposit. The money multiplier is 1 over the required reserve ratio. Total change in loans is equal to the amount a single bank can lend times the money multiplier. It's also the same thing as max change in money supply. And the total change in demand deposits is equal to the total change in loans plus the initial amount of money put in, or the deposit money. All right, so one wrinkle. And sometimes this pops up on my tests as well as the AP test. So if the Federal Reserve, not an individual, buys bonds from a bank as opposed to an individual depositing money, the bank doesn't have to hold reserves on this money. It can all be lent out as excess reserves. So this is something just to keep in mind in case you see this on the AP test. I will go through some scenarios in class regarding what happens when the Federal Reserve buys bonds as a part of monetary policy, and what that will look like, when it comes to multiple deposit expansion and max change in loans and money supply and all that good stuff. All right, so let's take a look at the assessment here. Given a required reserve ratio of 10%, assume an individual deposits $200,000 in DayZ Bank. Determine the maximum total change in loans in the banking system from this deposit. So this is calculating max change in loans. You can go ahead and look at the previous examples. To answer that question, feel free to use a calculator if you need. Be aware you have to calculate excess reserves before you can answer this question as well. Given a required reserve ratio of 10%, assume an individual deposits $200,000 in DayZ Bank. Determine the max change in demand deposits in the banking system from this deposit. Look at the examples. You should be able to answer that question. And you have the summary. I hope you all have a nice evening.